Bear with us on that. We'll bring you that as soon as we have it. But in the meantime, 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, a diplomatic protection officer held over the disappearance of Sarah Everard has been arrested on suspicion of murder. 2 sites in Kent are being searched in the hunt for the 33-year-old who went missing while walking home in South London a week ago. A woman in her 30s has also been arrested on suspicion of assisting an offender. The officer who's been detained was not on duty at the time of Miss Everard's disappearance. He is responsible for uniformed patrolling of diplomatic premises, including Downing Street. Boris Johnson has raised the case of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe in a phone call with the Iranian President Hassan Rouhani. Downing Street says the Prime Minister demanded her immediate release, calling her continued confinement completely unacceptable. Sir Keir Starmer has demanded a Commons vote on pay rises for NHS workers. The Labour leader says the government's proposed 1% increase is a real terms cut for health staff. Boris Johnson has insisted he is massively increasing investment in the NHS. Surge testing is being rolled out in parts of southwest London after someone tested positive for the South African variant of coronavirus. It affects the Battersea and Putney areas. Hundreds of passport control workers at Heathrow Airport are to stage a work to rule and an overtime ban later this month in a dispute over rosters. Separately, the airport's chief operating officer has told MPs passengers are facing unacceptable queues of up to 6 hours because of the time coronavirus checks are taking. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed down 4 points at 67.25. The pound buys $1.39 and €1.16. LBC weather, blustery showers tonight, very windy tomorrow with sunny spells and showers. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Andy Ivy.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 8 on LBC. Welcome to Cross Question, LBC's weekly political panel debate show. You can, of course, watch us as well as listen to us. We're on LBC's YouTube channel, on Global Player, the Facebook page and Twitter feed. We'd also love your questions for our panel, 0345 6060 973. And talking of our panel, let me introduce them to you. We're joined by Labour MP Grace Bryant, MP for the Rhondda, Conservative MP Alicia Kearns, MP for Rutland and Melton, and a PPS at the DCMS. We're joined also by a familiar voice to you, City AM editor Andy Silvester, and Tribune columnist Grace Blakeley is with us too. She's got a book out, The Corona Crash, How the Pandemic Will Change Capitalism. So we're ready for your questions, 0345 6060 973.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Let's go to our first question, and welcome to you all, by the way. David is in Enfield. Hello, David.
Good evening, panel. The Harry and Meghan saga highlights the fact that we have a white, hereditary, aristocratic and highly privileged royal family as the symbol of a modern, progressive, multicultural democracy. Does the panel think this is a problem, and will this arrangement continue to survive in the 21st century?
Grace Blakeley.
I'm glad you came to me first, Iain, as I think you know how I feel about the monarchy. No, I mean, as a Republican, I obviously don't think that in a modern, allegedly democratic society, we should be having a hereditary monarchy as the head of our state. I think this really speaks to the need to kind of modernise British democracy more generally. We really kind of, never had that full democratic revolution, which is reflected in the fact that we have all these kind of archaic elements to our democracy, like the monarchy, the House of Lords, the fact that, the City of London local authority is actually a private corporation. All of these things date back to the kind of feudal way in which our economy and our society was once organised. And I think it's completely and utterly out of place in a modern democracy.
But would you accept that your views do not chime with the majority of the British public, and the Republican movement, if there is such a thing, hasn't really made any great progress, I would say, probably in the last 20 years?
I mean, I don't disagree with you. And obviously, you know, the fact of saying we need to reinvigorate...
Well, that's a first.
Oh, sorry?
I said that's a first.
No, it's not. We've agreed on many things before in the past, Iain, and also had
We
some spicy disagreements as well. But no, I mean, obviously, when I'm talking about democracy here, if the majority of the British population does want to keep the monarchy, it's not a position that I personally agree with, but it's not also a kind of hill that I'd be willing to die on. To be honest, I've found the last several weeks of coverage of all of this stuff not particularly enlightening, given all the other massive issues that our country is facing at the moment. So I'd be quite happy never have to talk about the monarchy again, to be honest.
Well, that is something that we can both agree on. Alicia, Kearns, what's your view?
I mean, I think this has been a really sad state of affairs, really. And I think anyone who's watched the Harry and Meghan interview just leaves with that sense of sadness because, you know, this is ultimately a family dispute playing out for the world to see. And I think what it's really shown is that to America, the royal family is nothing more than another soap opera, whereas to us, it's our royal family. It is an institution to which I serve as a member of parliament. And I just think it's a real sad state of affairs. And I think we need to move forward. And I think the royal family statement yesterday was a dignified one. And I think it's one that says, look, let's draw the line in the sand. Let's focus, let's learn, let's improve. Let's make sure we're not just moving on and forgetting what's happened here. But I think really the whole country just feels saddened and we do need to move forward from this point and not let an Americanized fascination with soap operas and turning our royal family into one become that focus.
But they've turned themselves into one, haven't they, to be fair? I mean, it's not untypical. Most families have their soap opera elements to them, but it is something that they've caused themselves by their behaviour.
I mean, I think it's a difficult one because none of us have been there and seen exactly what's gone through. And you can understand why, if you feel that you've been muzzled, you would want to get your side of the story out. That's, you know, something you can understand completely. But I think the dignified thing to do when you are in that position is to really focus on trying to deal with it privately. And really what we all want to see is the family heal and come back together. And I think privately is clearly the only way that's going to happen.
Chris Bryant, it's been a fairly unedifying few days, maybe few weeks. What's your view on David's question?
I'm pro Princess Diana. That's about as far as my whole interest in this subject matter goes. I was terribly upset. You'll laugh at me, but I mean, I was terribly upset when Diana died. It felt as if she had touched the funny bone of the British people in a strange way. And oddly, I was the person who put all those big screens up in cathedrals and in Hyde Park and so on, so that everybody could take part in the service. And one of the things that really upset me then, and I still sort of hold this, is that I'd got a printer to publish copies of the Order of Service. So everybody in the country could, if they wanted to, take part in the service, singing the hymns at the same time. And the royal household, I don't blame the royal family for this, but the royal household said that we weren't allowed to print them unless I could guarantee that there would be a member of the royal family at each and every one of the different places where these people were going to be done. So in the end, I got the Daily Mail to print it instead.
You and the Daily Mail united. Well, that's something anyway. But
I have my moments with the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail have been brilliant on concussion in sport, which is one of my big kind of campaigns. So you know, you get as you know, Iain. Sometimes you just have to lie down with the devil.
I don't know why you think I would know that, but anyway, the point that I made.
Too well.
The point that I made on Monday night was I thought that Prince Charles hasn't learned from history, and I think he comes out of this possibly worse than anyone with some of the things that Meghan and Harry said. And the way that Princess Diana was treated, you would have thought that he might have learnt a few lessons from that and maybe understood a little bit more and been a bit more empathetic to the position that Harry has adopted. Do you think he's got questions to answer?
Oh, I don't know. I remember going as a Labour MP for newly elected 2001. We were all summoned to St James's Palace to meet Prince Charles, and all the Labour MPs sat at one side and all the Tory MPs sat at the other side. And when Prince Charles came in, all the Tory MPs stood up and none of the Labour ones did. And it was all very awkward. Everybody sort of stared at each other. And, I feel quite emotionally about it all in a strange way. And I think a lot of people do. I don't know whether you've watched The Crown. I thought the most moving episode of the lot was the one about Aberfan. When I think there are moments when it is genuinely very, very difficult for a royal family that has to stay out of politics to show a bit of ankle, as it were. Terribly, terribly difficult thing to do. So I would hate being a member of the royal family. So I'm just pro Diana.
Okay, we got that message loud and clear. Andy Silvester, I don't know what your views are on Diana, but what are your views on that interview and David's question?
I mean, as Alicia said, and I think most people agree, it's just incredibly sad for a whole number of reasons to see a family tragedy like this. It's sad for the family. It's a soap opera within their family, and it's difficult to move on to. But it's sad too, I think, for the institution of the royal family because of two reasons, really. One, Meghan's arrival into the family was, and I know we look back on it and recollections may vary, to coin a phrase, but the coverage around the wedding, the coverage on social media, the coverage in newspapers was overwhelmingly positive, some of it even a bit self-congratulatory about, what a step forward this was for not just the royal family, but for Britain. And we had some relatively constructive discussions about race and modernity in the UK and about tolerance. That now is that ship has very much sailed and the conversation has moved in a very different direction. And I think the other sad thing about this is that the royal family, no matter what you think of how silly it might be for people to sit around the table at 3 p.m. on a Christmas day to listen to the Queen or to just the very institution, even if you are, a full-blooded Republican, the work that they do around certain causes, in raising them up the media agenda, be that Diana and Mines, or indeed recently William and Harry around mental health. All of that has to now take a back seat to this sort of family psychodrama played out in the media across two different continents. And I think it's a terrible shame that we've got to a point where all of those things are just not disregarded, but they just won't be spoken about for some time. The royal family can't do much in terms of that level of positivity right now. And frankly, from a media perspective, the blame is laid not necessarily with the royal family. I think the media has a certain responsibility or whatever, but mainly it lies with the royal household and the courtiers and the aides who haven't adapted to a world where we expect our roles to be more transparent, we expect our roles to be more approachable, and we expect all individuals to have more agency and more decision-making power over what it is that they do with their lives.
Actually,
David,
it's an interesting point.
Okay, go ahead, Chris.
I was just going to make... I would prefer a slimmer monarchy. You may recall there was the Atocha rail disaster attack in Madrid several years ago, and I went as the representative of the British government and to the memorial service, and it was really striking that the King and Queen just got in the lift with everybody else, of the King and Queen of Spain. Very different situation from here. And I would kind of prefer a more democratized royal family.
David, let's come back to you. You asked the question. How would you answer your own question?
Well, I would like to see a slimmed-down monarchy. And if the monarch is to remain as the head of state, I think the monarch should be able to express political opinions where appropriate. Otherwise, what is the purpose of being the head of state if you're powerless? And
well, surely
secondly,
the purpose of head of state is to be above all of that. And if you think of presidents like the ceremonial president of Ireland doesn't have a political position, even though they may have come from the world of politics.
Well, this is my opinion, okay? And secondly, I think institutions like the House of Lords, which are really a hangover of the aristocratic feudal historical system of government, we still have 90 hereditary peers in the House of Lords, one of whom stood up today and told the nurses that they didn't deserve more than 1%. I think that has to be reformed fairly quickly to restore some confidence in our system of government. I mean, if you had Donald Trump appointing senators to the US Senate, there'd be a huge outcry.
OK, David, thank you very much for that. We'll come to more of your questions in a moment on Cross Question 0345 6060 973. It's 14 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
and maybe feeling scared. You should expect to see continued increased police patrols in the area, as well, of course, as continued large-scale investigative activity. Please do report any concerns you may have, whatever they may be, to us. We have been so impressed and very thankful for the public's support for the investigation in so many different ways, but in particular for sharing our appeals for information. And we are deeply grateful to all those many, many people who came forward with information that has assisted us. My thoughts tonight are with Sarah, her family, and her loved ones.
Metropolitan Police Commissioner Cressida Dick. Charlotte Lynch, our reporter, is outside New Scotland Yard. Obviously some terribly sad news there that Cressida Dick had to impart. A body has been found in woodland near Ashford, almost certainly that of Sarah Everard. Charlotte, you've been covering this right from the start. Not the news anyone wanted to hear tonight.
Absolutely not. This is a case that has gripped the nation. Thousands and thousands of people have been thinking of Sarah Everard, wishing the best for her and hoping and praying that she would be found alive. This, of course, is absolutely devastating news for all those that knew her and loved her, her family, who had joined in the search in Clapham, where she was last seen a week ago tonight. They will understandably be incredibly shocked and distraught, and so many across the country will feel their pain. Sarah was walking home, having been to a friend's house. She was walking home to Brixton, but police said they were unclear whether she ever got there. She was wearing bright clothing. She was last seen on a well-lit main road, captured by a doorbell camera after police issued a major appeal for footage. But it appears the absolute worst imaginable thing happened to the 33-year-old. So many people will be totally rocked by this news, even thousands who didn't know her. The outpouring of support on social media has been phenomenal, with dozens of people speaking out in support of her and just willing for her to be all right. Even tonight here outside of New Scotland Yard, a group of people, mainly of women, have gathered. I can see them now holding a silent vigil. They're bowing their heads, some of them shaking their heads in absolute disbelief. They didn't know Sarah, but they've laid flowers here and a candle has been lit. And they don't know each other either, but they represent so many thousands of people across the country tonight who will be heartbroken and shaken by this news.
Charlotte, thank you very much indeed. That's Charlotte Lynch reporting for us outside New Scotland Yard. Just to recap, a body has been found in woodland near Ashford. A man has been arrested on suspicion of murder and he's a serving Metropolitan Police officer. Well, if we have any more developments on that over the course of the evening, we will, of course, bring them to you. Let's return to Cross Question. Let me reintroduce my panel. We have Chris Bryant, Labour MP for the Rhondda, with us. Conservative MP Alicia Kearns, MP for Rutland and Melton. Tribune columnist Grace Blakeley, author of The Corona Crash, How the Pandemic Will Change Capitalism, and the editor of City AM, Andy Silvester. Right, let's go to our next caller. It's Caroline in Lambeth. Hello, Caroline.
Hello, good evening. I would like to ask the panel if they agree that the police should be knocking on doors in Kent and asking men to stay indoors so that women can move about public spaces safely, rather than asking the women to do that.
Well, I was going to say, because they have been knocking on doors in the area where Sarah Everard was last seen, and asking women to stay indoors. Alicia Kearns, this is an interesting one. We're going to be talking about this much more after 9 o'clock on the programme. But I wonder what your view is on this. Is there a need, as Caroline maybe suggests, for men to get some more education in how to ensure that women feel safe? Because the blame seems to be put on women too much, doesn't it?
I think, first of all, the entire nation is devastated by this news, because I think at a time when we've all been coming together to try and support each other, it's just devastating when everyone's heart's been with her family. And I think Cresta's voice sounded clearly that she feels betrayed by what's happened. In terms of the idea that women should stay indoors or men should stay indoors, let's be very clear. The person responsible, the perpetrator, is solely responsible. Women should not have to stay indoors. Men should not have to be locked away. This is about personal responsibility, and the individuals who would undertake such crimes like this need to face the full force of the law. But absolutely not. It is completely unacceptable to suggest that women are in some way responsible and therefore have to be locked inside their homes to be protected. That's why we have a police force. We have a free country. And men absolutely shouldn't be locked away either, because we should be able to trust that men should be able to behave themselves in the same way as that women should be able to go around our streets safely. So no, I'm afraid I don't have any truck for that sort of idea.
Andy Silvester.
Yeah, I'm a bit shocked by the statement from Cresta Dick, to be honest, because saying it's very rare is not okay. This is the greatest city in the world, and that shouldn't happen to anybody. And saying it's very rare is not good enough at all. But look, yes, the blame lies with the perpetrator, but it also lies, frankly, with the CPS, and it lies with the fact that crimes committed by men against women are not prosecuted often. Rape convictions in the UK last year fell to a record low, and we don't know the full details of this case, of course, and it may not be a part of that, and it may not be related, but when you have what campaigners have called the effective decriminalisation of rape, you have to look more carefully at the decisions that are being made right across government and the police force, and the work that's being done, because fundamentally, if we all agree that punishment is a deterrent, then there has to be punishment, or it is just not effective as a deterrent. And yeah, as I say, it's shaken a lot of people, I think.
Mm. Chris Bryant, do you think that men do need a bit of education? I mean, just simple things like if you are walking down a lit street late at night and there's a woman walking in front of you and you are a man, just cross over to the other side. Because if a woman feels that someone's walking behind them, she will feel unsafe. I mean, as a man, actually, I would feel unsafe if I was aware that someone was walking behind me. Is it somehow simple things like that maybe we need to talk about a little bit more?
Yeah, look, I mean, the main hope is obviously that every woman should feel safe walking home. And I think maybe we men all need to be a bit more sensitized. I've been struck by some of the things that female friends of mine have been posting on Twitter and Facebook and so on about, when they get in the cab, having a pair of trainers with them just in case they have to run at the end. Lots of things that I think men just wouldn't even conceive of as being a sort of issue for them. And sometimes there are still areas where we could do much better around lighting and making places feel safer, especially around bus stops, bus stations, railway stations as well. I mean, my patch in South Wales in the Rhondda is a very low crime area, just factually. But that doesn't necessarily mean everybody's going to feel safe. So you're right. I think, we men do need to do more to make sure that women feel safe. I mean, me and my husband, we tend, if a friend has had dinner with us or whatever, we tend to say, do text us when you get home, because we have a concern. And I guess lots of people will be doing that at the moment.
I don't think there's a single woman in the country that won't say that at some point walking home I never walk home with a hood up or headphones in. It's just not something I do. And I think it is something that I will say quite openly that ever since I was a very young girl, I've always thought, how am I getting home? If that falls through, what's my backup way of getting home? Who knows where I am? My mobile phone was always charged. My parents always knew where I was. Whereas my brother, in contrast, and maybe he's just more of a wild spirit, he would not be thinking about those different pathways of how to get home safely or what he needed or what backup was. And he definitely walked with his headphones in and his hood up. So I think, this will strike a chord with women across the country, because I really think every countries has done that.
Can I just come in here? Because, I think, this, I want to be very, very clear here. This is not just about personal responsibility. This is about a society that teaches us that women's bodies are expendable, that they are fodder for abuse and exploitation by men. It is about a society that teaches all of us that men are naturally violent. It is about a society that crushes and oppresses women's voices when they dare to speak out. It is about a society that has cut funding for legal aid that allows women to get out of dangerous situations. It's about a society which, as we just heard, rape has effectively been legalized, according to women's campaigning groups. It's about a society in which domestic abuse over the course of the pandemic has skyrocketed. This is not the way that human beings naturally are. This is not the way that life has to be. It's not just the case that we have to raise our daughters and our children to exist in a world where they have to text us when they're getting home or keep Find My Friends on their iPhone constantly. This is, the way that we teach ourselves, the way that we teach one another to treat women, to listen or fail to listen to them, to exploit women and to ignore them when they come forward and say, I don't feel safe. We know that there is so much that can be done to ensure that women are independent enough to be able to leave violent situations. We know that there is so much that can be done to provide funding for domestic abuse shelters. We know that there is so much that can be done to change the way that we talk about gender. This doesn't just affect women, it affects men as well. We have this idea that men are somehow naturally violent, which is just categorically not true. Violence against women is a social phenomenon that is different and takes different forms in different places all around the world. It is often associated, violent crime, the single biggest predictor of violent crime that exists across countries, across the world, is levels of inequality. And it's partly to do with, men basically thinking it becomes a kind of status thing to be able to own a woman's body and say, look, this is mine, I can do whatever I want with it. And that gets worse as men and women increase, as the power of men is institutionalized and that of women is crushed. I personally, at this point, this has affected me for a number of different reasons, but I don't feel like I can say why this has affected me so much. I don't feel like I can say, that I don't feel like I can say how close this is to me in many different ways, because I feel like that could come back and mean that I will be harmed at some point in the future as well. And we also know that from stuff on social media, women get constant death threats, constant abuse. And I just don't think that we can just chalk this up to one bad guy. This is a systematic social problem.
Well, I'm not going to try and get you to say anything that you're uncomfortable with, but I wonder whether you can comment on this report out today that we covered in the news hour, that 97% of women aged between 18 and 24 have experienced some form of sexual harassment. Now, that covers a wide spectrum of things. But is that something that you recognise, that sort of virtually everybody that you know from that age group would have experienced that?
I mean, pretty much. And that, again, comes from a lot of the stories that I hear about are, what would be comparatively minor things about the way that women are treated at work, in their offices or on the street or whatever. But also, and again, speaking from personal experience, some of it is violent and leads you to feel as a woman that you are unsafe. And not only that, but also that if you were to speak about the things that you've been through, you would be talked down to or told it was your fault. Or, if you were to come forward, for example, and say, look, this has happened to me, this violent crime has been committed against me, you would basically be, told that you have no case, that there's no point. It's like there's no point prosecuting violent crime against women for whatever reason, basically because we don't treat women's voices as valuable, as important as men's. And again, partly this is about representation as well. So yeah, I mean, that is definitely something I recognise.
Alicia, you wanted to come in, I think. I saw you shaking your head at one point there.
I think it's really dangerous when we slam an entire gender or an entire sex, the actions of some individuals. As a mother of a boy, I'm not raising him to believe that it's acceptable to violence to women. I don't believe...
That's exactly the opposite of what I was saying. I was saying this affects men just as much as it does women.
You said men are taught that it's okay to violence to women, that you stand all men as believing they can do whatever.
I was saying that the way that we conceptualize femininity and masculinity in this culture reinforces the false idea that women are violent, that men are violent, and that women are subservient. And that is wrong.
And I think it's very sad that you think that that is what's commonly, yes, absolutely, if you were to look at the crime stats, men are more violent than women. But your assertions were all about slamming all men as being violent.
That's crap. I'm sorry. That is absolutely categorically not true. Men are harmed just as much by patriarchy as women are. We have an epidemic of male suicide because men don't feel able to express their emotions.
You've had your opportunity to speak. Maybe ask Chris and Andy, did you feel slightly offended by the idea that all men apparently behave like this and are taught to behave like this?
Complete.
The thing I know.
Andy.
Oh, sorry.
I wouldn't say I'm offended, and I think there's something to that. And I think if the discussion that we're having is somewhat broader about, everything from turning a blind eye at university sports clubs to anything more than that, and about gender more broadly, I think there's a proper discussion to be had. I don't think I'm offended because the crime stats speak for themselves. I hope, and I fear we may not, who knows. If you look at what happened out of, for instance, the BLM movement, you've got reasons to be slightly pessimistic about it. But I think what Chris alluded to earlier about the outpouring of people on social media, about the efforts that my female friends will go to ensure that they can get home safely, becomes that learning opportunity for men, and also that it becomes an opportunity for government, for charities, for various other people to actually work that education down the train. And no, men are not being raised to be, rapists and abductors, but society is clearly still needs some work on this.
Okay, Chris.
And I think being offended by it is, I understand it because everybody can say not these men, but there's a bigger discussion to be had, and I think it's an important one to be had.
Okay, Chris.
You may have read that we had a pretty horrific murder of a 16-year-old girl last week in my patch. I won't go into it in depth because obviously that's subject to police investigations and all the rest of it. But I'm just conscious that I've been an MP for 20 years. We have a very low murder rate in my patch, but I think it's nearly 95% of the murders have been from a domestic partner to another, and sometimes killing the child as well. And a man killing his girlfriend or his wife and the child as well in many cases. And when I talk to the local police, they often say that their biggest challenge is domestic violence, by far and away bigger than any other challenge that they have in my area. We've got to redouble all our efforts on all of this. It is absolutely fundamentally depressing that the prosecution rate is going in the wrong direction for rape and sexually related crimes. If I had a daughter, I would just want her to grow up in a world where everybody was treated equally regardless of their gender, and they had all the opportunities in the world, and they didn't have to worry about whether they were out at night after 8 o'clock. I mean, some of these are just kind of basic things. I think there does need to be better financial support for, protective measures for women. I think this last year, we won't even know the reality of what has happened over this last year during the COVID pandemic, I think for some considerable period of time. And oddly, one of the things I was I've been in Westminster today, and last night I was walking past Westminster Abbey. It was only 8 o'clock at night, but it was completely dark. There wasn't a single person in Victoria Street. And I can imagine that's much more frightening now, oddly, than it normally would be, because there'll be lots of people there.
Okay. Well,
I'm not sure I'm saying anything very interesting, really.
Well, Chris, the incident that you referred to in your constituency, was that the murder in Treorchy?
Yes, that's right, yeah.
Well, in the last half an hour,
Chinese
South Wales Police have confirmed that Shun Zhu, aged 31, has been charged with the murder of the 16-year-old Wenjing Lin, as well as the attempted murder of a 38-year-old man. He'll be appearing before Merthyr Tydfil Magistrates Court on Thursday, the 11th of March. It's 8:37 on LBC. Let's get the news headlines from Andy Ivey.
Police searching for 33-year-old Sarah Everard, last seen in South London as she walked home a week ago, have found what they believe to be human remains. A short time ago, the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Dame Cressida Dick, gave an update on the investigation.
The discovery was made in an area of woodland in Ashford in Kent. As you can imagine, at this early stage, we are not able to confirm any identity, and indeed, that may take us some considerable time. Specialist officers have been with Sarah's family to update them on the investigation and to continue to give them the best support we possibly can.
A serving Metropolitan Police officer who works in diplomatic and parliamentary protection has been arrested on suspicion of murder. Dame Cressida says there'll be continued high levels of patrols in the area where Ms Everard went missing. LBC weather: blustery showers tonight with coastal gales. Very windy tomorrow with sunny spells and showers. A high of 11 degrees.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
It's 8:42. Chris Bryant, Alicia Kearns, Grace Blakeley and Andy Silvester with us answering your questions. It is time to hear from Grace Blakeley's biggest fan in the whole of the UK, Sean in concert with a question. Hello, Sean.
How are you doing? Are you all right?
I'm all right, Sean. What would you like?
I've got a question for the panel. Should Piers Morgan never be allowed on television again the way you ripped into the I can't remember her name.
Meghan Markle.
Meghan, aye.
Well, it's a question.
Should be allowed to go back into any broadcasting.
Well, let's put that question to you, Grace, because it's obviously outrageous for anyone to walk out of a Good Morning Britain studio, as I'm sure we can all agree. What's your answer to Sean's question?
I think that the presenters that we have are generally a reflection of the demand for television from certain sections of the population and the way that that's interpreted by the producers. I don't think it would be rational to ban certain people from presenting certain shows. I think what we need is not just a kind of more representative media where we have more voices that are being elevated to these positions, but also, the kinds of presenters we get are often related to the kinds of issues that we decide to discuss. So there is a huge focus on questions of individual family drama, stuff with Meghan Markle and the royal family. There's a lot of stuff about kind of culture wars and all these kind of classic frames that are just reproduced fairly uncritically by the media. What we don't spend enough time talking about is the lived experience of the average person. And I think this has become very, very clear during a pandemic in which we basically had a K-shaped recovery. Some people have been protected and their lives have, been difficult, sure, but they haven't been completely eviscerated. Whereas some people are literally on the front lines every day, putting their lives on the line to keep everyone else safe, perhaps going through unemployment, perhaps struggling with problem debt. And their voices
slightly going off the question. We're slightly going off the question here because, of course, Piers Morgan, you could argue, has been the main thorn in the side of the government in the media throughout the pandemic. And yet we're not quite sure whether he voluntarily left or was, shall we say, resigned, if you see what I mean. But is it healthy when someone leaves a programme because they've uttered an opinion which some people don't find acceptable? Chris Bryant's come to you next.
I think Piers is just a bully, and he always has been and always will be. And so he regularly bullies interviewees. And of course, when we don't like the person who's being interviewed, then we cheer. But actually, that's pretty rubbish on our behalf, because I just think a degree of decency and courtesy is a pretty good thing in life. Do you remember Carolina Hearn? She used to do that. Let's have a heated debate. And I hate that kind of broadcasting, which is people deliberately adopting attitudes which they don't really believe. They're only adopting them just so as to, well, frankly, to get paid. And I just think that brings an element of cynicism and scepticism into the whole of the British political cycle. Piers, let's not forget, was sacked from the Mirror because he faked photographs which put our British troops in mortal danger.
Which he still denies.
Well, he was sacked for it. And of course, he engaged in phone hacking. So I'm not a big fan of Piers.
I think we can tell that. Andy Silvester, are you going to miss him?
Piers is not the issue here. The question was, should he be allowed on TV again? And unless you are inciting hate or violence, then of course you should be allowed to have an opinion on TV in the same way that you should be allowed to have an opinion on the radio or call in or write newspaper articles. That's how freedom of speech works. Now, I thought what Piers Morgan said about suicide on Monday was somewhere between idiotic and tin-eared. And I think that considering the progress Britain has made on mental health over the last 10 to 20 years, it was a little bit like going back to the stiff upper lip of the 80s. But should you be fired for having an opinion? That's a question for ITV. They're a commercial broadcaster. They have commercial imperatives with advertisers. I personally think that an awful lot of people share Piers Morgan's views on the interview, on the veracity of what was being said. I'm not saying I do, I'm just saying a lot of people do, but I think there's a wider question here about how it looks to the outside, and we don't know.
I agree with that, Andy, but do you not feel as if he's just waged a vendetta against Meghan? But it's gone on forever now. I mean, it's like it's a permanent obsession, and that does feel like bullying to me.
Well, I will confess that I have not watched enough GMB over the past sort of 3 to 4 years. But in the same way that an awful lot, and I think this is an important point, an awful lot of the criticism of the media more generally is driven from quite entertaining minute and 30-second clips on Twitter that are shared and go viral, and we miss the wider context. So I'm just going to park that and say I don't know enough about what Piers Morgan has said about Meghan over the past few years. What I do know is that if you are fired for having opinions that, and I say we don't know if he's fired, we don't know if it was a confected row, we don't know if he walked. If it's an opinion that is relatively, I would imagine, widely held in the public, if you look at the polling, and if mainstream broadcasters take those people off air for having that opinion and for questioning the opinion that you are supposed to have, then what happens to those opinions is they get driven more and more deeply into slightly bonkers Facebook and Twitter and social media groups where there is no regulator, where there is no...
Andy, are you really saying that there's not enough right-wing nonsense in the British media at the moment?
What I'm saying is that if you take opinions and make them unacceptable as a...
He's got acres in the Daily Mail.
Let's hear from Alicia Kearns. You're a PPS at the DCMS. I mean, do you think that Piers Morgan should be on television again? Sean's suggesting that he shouldn't be.
I mean, I have to say, I don't think there's anything entertaining about being divisive, abrupt, rude, where the interview focuses on the interviewer rather than the person they're meant to be getting information out of. And so I think it's time that he did take a bit of time away from the airwaves. And actually, one of the things that was missed the other day amid his storming off, which clearly, and that doesn't hurt people's careers if they storm off air, but you may have noticed that he turned to his co-presenter and said to her, well, we know it's summer because I've forgotten her name, so I apologise. But we know
Charlotte
it's summer.
Hawkins.
There we go. We know it's summer because Charlotte comes in a miniskirt. Charlotte, stand up, turn around. He treated her like some kind of 1970s Miss World contestant. And actually, given what we're talking about after 9 o'clock, that was deeply offensive to me. But I have to say, like Andy, I don't think I've ever watched more GMB other than just clips on Twitter because, frankly, I don't rate that sort of journalism. I don't rate that sort of approach.
It's very good on Friday morning, I've heard, but anyway.
Yeah, I do often wonder how he manages to wake up in the morning and just get so angry so quickly. But again, I think it's kind of, not particularly productive just to focus on individuals because this is obviously a structural problem.
We are going to take another of your questions. Sean, I'd love to come back to you, but I think we know what you think about this. You made it quite clear in your question. Thank you for that. We'll come back for another question in just a moment. It's 10 to 9.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
It's 8:54. Let's go to our final question of the hour, to our panel, which consists of Chris Bryant, Alicia Kearns, Grace Blakeley and Andy Silvester. Brenda is in St Ives in Cambridgeshire. Hello, Brenda.
Good evening, Ian. Good evening, panel. I would like to ask the panel, in view of this disgraceful 1% pay rise for the NHS, what their views are on these vanity projects that Boris Johnson is about to embark on, or has embarked on, 2.6 million for the Downing Street renovations for a White House-style press briefing, and also the £100,000 he's spending on refurbishing his residence, and I believe £9 million on some project in Whitehall. What do the panel think of this sort of money being spent, bearing in mind we're in this diabolical situation?
Okay. I'm going to ask for relatively short answers because we are up against the clock. Chris Bryant, you have an open goal. Would you like to kick the ball into the net?
Look, this is the preposterous thing about this government is it's been extraordinarily good at wasting our money. I think the biggest one is the £37 billion spent on test and trace, which comes in at more than £1,000 per head of taxpayer population, which, according to the National Audit Office, made absolutely no difference to the pandemic. And was a complete failure. Oh, and surprisingly enough, of course, it was run by a Conservative peer. It's all the contracts that have gone to friends of Conservative MPs, sometimes to companies that had absolutely no experience in the field for which they were being commissioned, and without proper vetting. It's the extraordinary amount of money that is being spent on vanity projects, which Boris Johnson has a personal history of doing ever since he dreamt up the Garden Bridge in London, which I think ended up costing £23 million, and not a single piece, a bucket of cement was mixed.
Alicia, when you look at it in the way that Brenda described it, it is quite a contrast. Only 1% for the nurses, and then all of this money being spent on what she calls vanity projects.
First of all, the refurbishment isn't happening. That's just another one of these lovely attacks on Carrie. In terms of the studio, actually,
it's happened. It's already done.
But the whole point with media reporting is that Carrie apparently is planning some massive overhaul over the next few weeks. It's not happening.
It's already been done.
Every Prime Minister has to change when they move in, and that's what happens. In terms of the idea about the studio, I've had emails from constituents saying, we like the daily briefings, please can they continue? We need to have some way of doing it. But the key thing is on test and trace, this whole argument, the amount of money that's been put aside is for 2 years. So first of all, we haven't spent half the money as yet. But secondly, 80% of all the money is spent on procuring tests and undertaking tests. Is anyone suggesting we shouldn't be spending that money on tests? Because I remember when we rolled out test and trace, no one was saying, wait, don't throw too much money at it. It's absolutely about doing the tests, and 1.5 million tests done in one day, that wouldn't have happened without the investment. So people can...
Why have we just then
Chris,
heard that test and trace had no clear impact?
Chris, I can't bring you back in because we really are up against the clock, and we haven't heard from Grace and Andy yet. Grace?
I mean, we've heard today that test and trace has had no clear impact, basically, and that the systems that have been tried in other parts of the world have been much, much more effective for much less money. But this is actually part of a much wider problem, which is that we've actually seen upward redistribution over the course of this pandemic. We've seen at the very top of society, whether they're the wealthy who've seen their wealth increase partly because of the policy of the Bank of England, or whether it's the fact that, many companies, and often companies that have a history of avoiding tax, of extremely high executive pay, have taken money out of the public purse, at the same time as we are saying that nurses who have been putting their lives on the line don't deserve a pay increase that will allow them to make ends meet. That is the issue. Brenda hit the nail on the head.
Andy?
Test good, trace bad. I think it's endemic of issues with this particular number 10, and I don't mean Carrie, by the way. I mean other people around number 10, who are obsessed with the sort of internecine warfare there, and who are more interested in 2 billion being spent here and there, and this kind of power struggle behind there, when we have the most important crisis that we have to deal with that any of us could ever have conceived of. And I am just so tired of seeing, and it isn't the media's fault because we have to report on what people are saying, but briefings from different sides of the Conservative Party's leadership arguing about this stuff when they should be focusing on the most important thing, which is getting this country unlocked, rebuilding the economy, and allowing people who have taken an almighty economic hit to start rebuilding their lives.
And we have time quickly for a final text question from Ruth in Welland. If we got rid of the monarchy, who should become our new queen? Well, Grace has had a long time to think about this one. Who would you nominate, Grace?
I think I would put it to a vote.
Oh, that's wimping out, I'm afraid.
Maybe you, Ian.
Are you calling me a queen?
Well, everyone could be a queen.
Chris Bryant.
I'm not available. No, sorry, RuPaul. Because RuPaul says every week, if you can't love yourself, how are you going to love anyone else? Can I have an amen?
Amen.
Amen. Alicia.
Do you know what's really annoying? Is my first one was going to be Chris, particularly has a fetching new waistcoat, which will go very well down, and I'm sure he'd love it. And my backup was going to be RuPaul. So Chris has literally stolen every single possible answer I was going to give. I think we stick with the Queen. She has held up a light through so much in this country. And let's not forget that from the Second World War to this pandemic, she has been a light for so many people and a real rock of stability.
Well, it's nice to finish with a bit of a coalition there. Andy, what's your answer?
Mary Berry. Baking lessons.
No, I wouldn't have Mary Berry because when she came to the Ronda, she said to some poor chap, "Have you ever seen a turkey?" And he said, "Yeah, last Christmas."
Well, I must admit, I interviewed Mary Berry quite a few years ago now, and I'm afraid I made her cry, which is obviously a mortal sin because she is a national heroine. I won't go into the details.
I upset the Queen as well, but anyway.
You cry, that's...
No, I'm sorry. We are going to go to the news in a minute. You upset the Queen. I think we need to know the details of this.
Sorry, I haven't got time. Not available.
He's clocking off. Right, thank you very much, all four of you. If you missed any of our Cross Question tonight, there is the podcast every week. It'll be available from about midnight. Chris Bryant, Alicia Kearns, Grace Blakeley and Andy Silvester, thank you very much indeed. Coming up in a moment, we're going to be talking about the fact that a new report says that almost all young women in the UK have been sexually harassed. What can be done about that? 0345 6060 973. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 2 minutes past 9.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, what are believed to be human remains have been found in Kent, where police have been searching for missing woman Sarah Everard. The 33-year-old disappeared a week ago as she walked home